In this video, we're going to rank every house at this year's Halloween Horror Nights from worst to best, starting off with number 10, Chucky Ultimate Kill Count. For me, this was the only mediocre house this year. While I enjoyed the humor of the Q video and certain moments of theming, for the most part, this house was extremely weak. It's not very scary, with lots of blank space left between each individual scare. Speaking of those scares, they're mostly done with little Chucky dolls attached to people's hands. While it is kind of funny, I just don't think any of the scares are really effective. Not to mention, while some of the theming is nice, it pales in comparison to every other house at the event. Worse yet, the layout of this house means there's a break right in the middle of it, which is extremely awkward, although the theming does help. Overall, this has to be my least favorite at the event. Luckily, the rest of the lineup this year is much better. Number 9, Stranger Things 4. Despite being one of the most popular houses this year, I was a bit mixed on Stranger Things. Don't get me wrong, the theming is a huge step up from Chucky, with a lot of great moments from the show. However, I do feel like the content of this season in particular makes it hard to transform into a house. Vecna is really the only monster this season, which means that most of the scares are achieved by having our protagonist jump out and yell random things. Those scares felt pretty lame to me, which brings down this house a fair amount. Otherwise, though, I do think some of the moments they took from the show weren't really ideal for a Halloween Horror Nights house. Eddie and Dustin rocking out in the Upside Down is a cool moment, but feels a little silly in this house. All of that makes this experience a bit disappointing for me. It has its moments, but for the most part, it doesn't really come together. Number 8, The Exorcist Believer. I thought this house was pretty surprising. The first half has a good amount of set variety, from the small village entrance to the dense and endless forest. From there, however, the house gets a little more plain. We spend a lot of time in blank hallways and identical rooms, which makes the second half a little weak. While the scares are decent and the beginning is great, I do think this is one of the weaker houses at the event. It's still very good, but not a favorite of mine. Number 7, Yeti Campground Kills. This house is less scary and more silly. Even with its lack of scares, simply looking around this house is pretty stunning. I love the Yeti designs and the huge detailed set pieces. There's one set piece in particular where the floor above you has caved in, creating this amazing effect. Still, while the concept is fun and the set pieces are great, I do think the silliness of it all is more detrimental than anything else. It's a lot of fun, but not one of the highlights. Number 6, Blood Moon Dark Offerings. It's hard to explain why this house ranks in the bottom half. Blood Moon has both incredible set pieces and incredible scares, with a theme that allows for some terrifying moments. I can understand why this ranks highly for so many, but personally, there's not any specific moment that really stands out for me. While the theming is great, the theme itself feels a little plain, with a lack of any real variety in the set pieces. It's still a great house, and likely one of the best in terms of pure scariness. For me though, I feel as though the next 5 stand out just a bit more. Number 5, The Darkest Deal. I really enjoyed this one. The sets and scares are both pretty solid, but what really does it for me is the story. This is the clearest narrative out of any house this year, as we watch a musician sell his soul to the devil and witness the consequences of that deal. There's a lot of great touches I caught on my second run, which add even more to the great story. The sets don't stand out quite as much as some of the other houses, but it's still really solid throughout. As a whole, this has to be one of my favorites. Number 4, Dr. Oddfellow's Twisted Origins. I can see why this is a fan favorite. The colorful carnival theming makes this house feel really special in the lineup. It also leads to some fantastic and unique scares, with one of my favorites being the bull near the middle. Being a tent house, the sets aren't quite as grandiose as some of the others, but the detail is still pretty stunning throughout. I also just love the character of Dr. Oddfellow, who can be seen all over the event this year. The backstory is really cool and adds even more to an already great house. My second run of this house in particular was magical, with no one ahead of me and nearly every scare actor coming after me. That perfect run elevated this house even more, making it another favorite from this year. Number 3, Dueling Dragons Choose Thy Fate. As a Universal fan, this house was specifically designed to appeal to me. From the very start, this house is packed to the brim with references to old Universal attractions. Even without those references though, I think this house is absolutely immaculate. Admittedly, it's far from the scariest house of the bunch, but the incredible creature designs and costuming more than makes up for it. Not only that, but the sets are enormous and absolutely entrancing, putting you right into this fantasy world. After my first night, I considered this to be my favorite of the bunch, but admittedly, the magic wore off a bit after my second run. The choosing your fate aspect in particular is a bit of a letdown, although I do love the winning/losing aspect of it. Even so, this is a great house, even if it isn't quite my favorite anymore. Number 2, The Last of Us. From the highly themed set pieces to the well done scares, The Last of Us was a joy from start to finish. The world building is perfectly accomplished here, using actors and sets to showcase this apocalyptic world. There are some scares that don't utilize any monsters, but they still feel effective since the normal people seem violent and on edge. As for the monsters, I love their designs, with some really detailed costumes that work perfectly for the house. There's also a ton of effects used to elevate the experience, like floating spores and several shadow projections. I may be a bit biased with it being my first house I've ever done, but overall I thought it was incredible. Number 1, Universal Monsters Unmasked. I'm shocked at how great this house is. The monster lineup is very strange but works surprisingly well. The Phantom of the Opera section is insanely well themed, and the rest of the house doesn't disappoint either. There's a ton of moments I love here, from the hunchback hopping off the second floor to the room with the countless invisible men. In regards to theming, scares, and costumes, this house is simply unbeatable. Originally, this was all the way at number 5 for me. However, after 2 amazing runs by the end of the event, I can safely say this is my favorite house. A tremendous achievement by everyone involved. For even more on Halloween Horror Nights, check out my first impressions of the event here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.